Dr. Henry, it's good to see your face. I know that we are yet to be acquainted. Otherwise, it's my first interview with you. I have to take the opportunity to thank you for taking the time and giving your time.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very honored to be here.
I know that you hold several portfolios. I'm not going to even touch on your relationship as a judge with in the panorama competition. That is secret ground, and I'm not going there. So
Thank you.
I'm not gonna aggravate you where you come off the link. So, but tell us something. Tell us about your involvement with the steel pan as an instrument, and um, and how did you come to be involved in the how difficult is it to judge a competition as it involves the instrument?
Okay, if I may, let me rephrase let me reframe my involvement here, right? I, I, the question about how I got involved in Pan starts from the time I was very young, and my first live music experience was in San Fernando in Torrance Street, where I grew up. And one of the San Fernando bands came to do a block party, and they played music. Um, there's a piece called Also sprach Zarathustra. I can never pronounce it correctly, but it goes like this. Da 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 boom 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 boom. You know the piece, right? So this is what they played. And I have this feeling, this memory of feeling the bass vibrating in my body. I couldn't have been more than 6 or 7 at the time. That was my introduction to live music and to pan. And that experience has stayed with me as a formative one throughout the years. All right. Now, I I have a background and training in choral music. I am a conductor. And I start from the point of view of in music, in choral music, you're dealing with soprano, alto, tenor, bass. It's 4 lines of music, and every line has its own individual identity and purpose. In playing choral music, in practicing, studying, and analyzing choral music of various types, I've come to a particular understanding of how music can be structured, how music can be made to function, and the techniques and processes of composition that are used to make a musical expression interesting. And by musical expression, I am talking about the sound between two silences. So for me, music starts with silence and ends with silence. And then in between, there is this thing that happens, this adventure that you go on. So when I think about panorama music, I'm thinking about the sound between these two silences and the different voices within the panorama music. You have your high voices, you have your low voices, and they function and behave very much similar to what you would see in a choir. So for me, it is a natural kind of collaboration of thinking between my training and panorama music, which is what I consider to be my heritage. So that's where I begin. And I hope that's a sufficient first response, although I didn't really get back to the question of how do you judge, because I'm really trying to stay away from the question of how do you judge and really more to talk about, well, what is there to judge? I, I, I know that, in Trinidad and Tobago, we've just declared in law that the pan is a national instrument, and we have a long history of speaking great things about the pan and the history of the pan and the heroes of the development of pan. And I feel that there's a gap in that conversation. What about the music of the pan? I'm not talking about the fact that we enjoy music. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about, well, what happens between these two silences? Music starts with silence and ends with silence. Well, really, it starts with the countdown and ends with the chair, right? But in purest terms, you have these bookends. And in between, you have this sound adventure. And what we do with panorama music is um, we build a structure in sound. And that structure, it doesn't have it doesn't have pillars and joins and posts. What it has is processes and procedures and devices. And these processes, procedures, and devices serve the same function as what you would see holding up a building or holding a car together. This is what interests me most about the music of the pan. And the music of the pan, for me, I know I'm going on longer, but the music of the pan for me gets its best expression in panorama music. Why? Because panorama music is music that is written specifically and only for the pan. When we do Pan Festival, I love Pan Festival. What happens in Pan Festival many times bands have to do a own choice piece, right? And very often in the early days, what they would do is they would take an existing orchestrated composition and they would so written for strings and brass and winds, etc., and they would revoice it for the pan, and then they would play that. And in fact, the band that won the pan festival this year they won on the strength of that. And that is music that has been written for other instruments being reinterpreted on the pan. That's all well and good. Where is the music that is written specifically to be played on the pan? And the best expression of that is the panorama music, right? You might say, well, it's just a reworking of an existing song. True, but the reworking of the presentation of the original song material is what the first minute and a half of a panorama arrangement. And then everything after that is an extrapolation, an interpretation, a reimagining, a reconfiguration that comes completely out of the mind of the composer. We call them arrangers. Let's just say all you is call them arrangers. I call them composers because what they're doing is they are composing music that is directly based on this pre-existing song. So what are they doing? They're taking all of those procedures that they learned from those symphonic works that we used to transcribe. They're taking the processes of composition from those symphonic works that we used to transcribe. They're taking the devices from those symphonic works and putting them into the pan music. And along the way, they are devising and inventing new processes, procedures, and devices that suit the pan, and then incorporating those things. So in the process of imitating the music that they got from another place, they learn some things. And then the pan itself, because of the way the notes are laid out on the face and the way that a pan makes its melody, the pan itself has been teaching us over the past 60 years how a melody for the pan should sound and how orchestrated music for the pan should sound. And we've been testing that and proving it in the music of the panorama for the past 60 plus years. This is why I say that the panorama, not just pan music, which is beautiful in itself, is a big category, but the panorama music is the music that comes closest to being an indigenous, real, true, formal, composed Trinidadian music. I'm a
What
long
are,
talker. Please forgive me. Go ahead.
what are some of the ingredients that go into or that you look for when you're examining a panorama piece?
Certainly. For that, to answer that, I need to tell you about the Panorama Analysis Project. This is a project I started several years ago at the University of Trinidad and Tobago, where I'm employed. And the goal of the project is big, it's generational. And that goal is to study, and by that I mean analyze, every single panorama piece that's ever been done. Um, and in another forum, I'll talk about the structure of that research project. But what I and the team of people over the years who have helped me with that project, what we have learned together is that we've learned some things that some people think are obvious, right? That the panorama piece has a generic structure. It's really just a five-part structure with an introduction on one end and a outro on the other end. And in between, you have an exposition of the theme, a development of the theme, a recapitulation of the theme, right? So it's a five-part structure. And we've learned this not because the panmen say so, not because the arrangers told us, but because at this point we've studied something like 300 panorama arrangements, and all of them have the same structure. Now, it's one thing for people to say, I know that this is how it is, because this is what I do when I write it. And it's another thing to look from the start, the very first days of panorama to now, and you just look at the structure and you say, you know what? If you look at enough of these things, you start to see some um, some generic things that all of these pieces have. And so one of the things that you could say with confidence now, because it's borne out in data and not in wishful thinking, is that the panorama piece has a predictable generic structure that is five parts, right? One of the things that we can say with confidence about a panorama piece is that it is based on the presentation and then the variation of a theme. And by that, I mean you play the theme, da 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 dum, bum, ba, da, 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 happy birthday song, right? You present the theme. And then once you've presented the theme, you start to play the theme again. But this next time you play the theme, you do something a little bit different, right? And based on that thing that you do different, you express the whole theme. And then you say, okay, I'm gonna express the theme again. And this time I'll use something else to differentiate it from the way I played it before. So this is called theme and variations. And this is a formal structure that has been borrowed from the earlier symphonic tradition where it came from. And this is a tradition that goes back to the 18th century and composers like Mozart and Haydn, who composed pieces using theme and variations as the process for the development of the piece. So these are some of the things that we've learned, and that everybody knows, right? And it's okay, everybody. But it's again, I reiterate the point. It's one thing to say we know, and it's another thing to say we've studied, and we can say with confidence that this is as it is because we see it in the music. The music tells us what the music is. We play the music, we enjoy the music, and in studying the music, we learn what's there. And for me, this project is an important one because I feel strongly that the panorama music has so much to teach us about, about how we express the musical voice of our culture. Because the pan, as an instrument, makes a melody in its own way. Let me explain. On a piano, if you play do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, those pitches, those keys are next to each other on the keyboard. So do, re, if you move, it was called stepwise. Dum, bum, 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 bum. That stepwise motion mimics how a voice moves. So the smallest distance between two notes in the human voice is represented by small distance between notes on a piano, small distance between notes on a string instrument, etc., etc., etc. But on a pan, that doesn't matter because the two notes that are next to each other are not a small distance apart. They're usually a fifth apart. Ba 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 bum 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 bum, 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 right? And so if you were to play on a pan face, the notes that are next to each other, you wouldn't get a stepwise motion, you would get a leaping motion. Bear with me. So melodies on a pan, the easiest thing for a pan to play is a melody that jumps around a bit. And the hardest thing for a person to sing is a melody that jumps around a bit. So in terms of the human voice makes melody a certain way, and the pan makes melody a certain way, and they're different. And so when we say we're going to write music for the pan, person who did it in an excellent fashion was actually Kitchener. If you listen to a lot of Kitchener's melodies that he wrote specifically for the pan, you hear a lot of leaping around, bum, 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 bum. If you think of these melody, right? Climbing up a mountain stepwise, high above the sea. Okay, good. Find myself approaching a hive killer bee, fairly stepwise. But then you get to the next section. They bite me on my chin, pom 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 pom. Easy for a pan man to play, right? So these are the things that I, with my nerdish self, sit down and pour through, right? And I look at the original melody. Okay, the original melody is written for the voice. This songwriter, who is not Kitchener, so let's leave Kitchener aside. He's an outlier like Beethoven, right? Let's leave Kitchener aside. But this other songwriter, he writes this melody, and then the arranger now comes and he's interpreting this for the pan. First, he has to present it. Now, what is he going to do? And what you find a lot of the composers do, and I keep calling them composers, what you find a lot of these composers do is that they allow the voice of the pan to play along with the melody. And that's why sometimes you get these fantastical rearrangements of the melodies that seem to jump around a bit. This is the beauty of writing music for the voice of the pan. And this is what makes panorama music and pan music in general, right? When you arrange it out. But this is what makes the music so lively, so interesting, so unique. And this is what needs to be studied. Because the more we study it, then what we pass on to the generation of people who come after us is a whole library of processes, devices, and procedures that they can use as their starting point. So they're not only going by inspiration and by VAPs, but they're able to go and look into a piece and say, okay, here is this process and it has a name. We haven't reached that point yet in the project, but we will get there. It's a lifelong project.
When someone listens to a panorama piece,
Mm-hmm.
you as a with your music education would be hearing and listening for particular things and seeing things that we as lay persons don't. So we can't appreciate the music from your standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
It's an internal process in terms of everyone digests what they receive in the way that they can and with the limitations and with the knowledge that they have.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so when we listen to music, we hear our own thing. We may be of the view that this is fantastic, and someone like yourself may listen to it and be able to decompartmentalize it and to recognize that there are flaws in what I'm hearing. But
Mm-hmm.
some a layperson may not. So interpretation in terms of the presentation is important, and people appreciate things from where they stand and where they sit. My question is this: um, when you have like an own song, as we say, our language
Mm-hmm.
here, the composition is a composition composed and
Created by
arranged.
the arranger. Yeah, go ahead.
Right. The public may not be able to appreciate the music
Mm-hmm.
in the way that you, as a person trained in the manner that you have, would be able to. How difficult is that in terms of decompartmentalizing the piece um, when it's an own song, when it's something that it's not in the public space in the way that you may hear a contemporary piece produced by an artist, sung and presented by an artist, but we have the instrumentation of it. Is there a
That is
difference in
an
the
excellent question. That's an excellent question. And to answer it, I'm going to point you to the way that we produce panorama music in Trinidad and Tobago, which is unique, a unique point of culture, right? This is why panorama music is a living genre, right? How does panorama music get created? Well, you go to the panyard, let's say on Monday night, and then the arranger comes in and he says, okay, do this. And then the section leader says, okay, let's drill it. And you know what else is happening in the panyard? The audience is sitting down there watching the whole process. The audience sits there from day one. They come in, and the people who love the band, which is the people in the community, right? They come, they learn that song. They learn that song better than the judges in any competition will ever know it. They learn it better than I ever will, right? So the people in the panyard who are there every day listening and experiencing the putting together of the music. That, by the way, is a thing that does. Where else in the world can you go and sit down in somebody's rehearsal and watch them put a piece of art together? Sit down in somebody's studio and watch them put a piece of art together from day one to the final presentation. Only in the panyard, right? That's a unique part of Trinidad and Tobago culture, and nobody else does it. Nobody else in the world does it. This is our thing. But to answer your question, to say that the layperson isn't able to pull apart the piece, I would say the person who has been in the panyard from the start of the process to the end of the process probably knows that piece better than any judge in any competition would know it. They and that to me is part of the uniqueness of the panorama experience, right? It's that there's a conversation that's happening between the people in the panyard and the arranger, where he's sitting down and saying to himself, these people in this panyard every day, how do I keep them interested in this arrangement from minute one to minute five? Right? And there are things that arrangers have done over the years, right, to whip up the crowd and to draw the interest of the crowd and to lull the crowd and to excite the crowd. There are techniques that people use, right? And then in the midst of all of this stuff that people, these cliches that people are used to, you find those moments of innovation that just pop up. I remember going to the Renegades Panyard back in the 90s when Jit Samaru was putting down Bee's Melody on the band. And they spent about an hour working on this section, and the guitars were going pom pom pa da da ba da pom pa da pom pom pa da da ba da 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 pom pom pa. They worked on that and worked on that and worked on that and worked on that. And I sat there thinking to myself, this is I feel my head spinning. Right? This is just the guitars, just sitting down there going through that cycle. Right? It made me have this feeling of spinning. Um, and then to hear it in the context of the final performance, um, I felt a kinship in that moment with the musicians, the guitar players, with Jit, with the band, and with Kitchener in a completely unique setting and a unique configuration um, that I haven't experienced in any other musical setting. It's completely Trinidadian, completely unique to our culture, to the Panyard culture. It's part of the experience of the genre that is the panorama experience, right? So I think I have a great deal more confidence in the people in the Panyards to be able to tell me what is important about the way a piece is composed, because they're the ones that were there all the way through, listening to the music get put together. If you sit down and you watch somebody assemble a car for 50 years, you know about that car. And the people in the panyards are the ones who know these pieces. And that's why they're so loyal, right? That's why, I mean, I didn't come to talk about judging, but in my experience as a judge, I've always been impressed by when you go to the panyard, when you have the judging in the panyard and the community comes out, That to me is the most thrilling part of the entire experience. And you're not there to judge that, but um, it never ceases to amaze and impress and inspire me, right? That it doesn't matter what community you're looking at, there's always this big crowd of people who are there to support their band. They support and their band is the pride of their community. And that is something nobody else on the face of this planet can boast about. Is that our communities support the music that is coming out of the communities. That's the answer to the question. I know it's not what you expected, but it's the only true answer I can give.
If I'm overstepping, you're free to correct me, but I have to ask.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard composers, and I'm using your word composer as opposed to arranger. I've heard composers say through the years that um, when they receive comments from the persons that judge their music,
Mm-hmm.
they find themselves at times, if they follow the comments to its minuscule point, they're more or less reproducing the song, not as in what they created, but presenting to those interpreting what they want to hear. In other
Mm-hmm.
words, the pressure on the arranger composer is to make modifications along the way in order to facilitate the person who is interpreting. So they feel like
Mm-hmm.
what you hear, and let's say at the latter stages, is not really what they had in mind when they started the process.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel as an interpreter of what you hear and having to comment on the pieces that you hear from time to time or through the various stages, do you feel that you're impacting on music positively, or or what you're doing is basically causing the composer to reconfigure what he has his original piece to and adding taste or subtracting from what his take on the music would have been?
That's a very interesting question. Um, and you're right. I wouldn't want to discuss um, the panorama judging, but let me talk about what we do at the Academy for the Performing Arts. We do a mini panorama every year, just for the students of the APA Pan Studio, right? We have four bands, and we do it internally. Now, in the past, when I as the teacher, right? When I've gone in there and sat down and listened and tried to judge, I would write comments, and those comments would be based on the things that I know that we're teaching the students with regard to harmony and melody and the this and the that and so on and so on. But also what we teach students as about things like, well, you know, everybody's not playing together. You got to sort that out, right? It needs to be rehearsed better. Performance related things on one end, and then you have arrangement related things on the other end. And in that setting, the goal of the commentary is to allow the band management, because in our setting in the academy, we mirror the structure of the Panyard, right? So each of these small bands has their own management committee. So the band management now takes the comments and they go and they try to address, on the one hand, the performance related things. If everybody's not playing together, we need to drill better so that everybody's playing together. And so the ensemble of the piece is tightened up. If there is something in the use of harmony that isn't working, then you have a decision to make. These bands, the students arrange the bands, the students drill the bands, the students do everything. So you have a decision to make. Do I try to interpret what the judge has said and rework the piece? Do I try to correct this impression that I've left with the judges, or do I redo it? And that's a decision that we leave to the students, because we think we build in them the autonomy to make creative decisions based on meaningful feedback. Um, Now, I I wouldn't want to take that student experience and extrapolate that out to the national panorama, but I can tell you that in when I listen, when I listen to work that happens in the context of education, my goal always is to make sure that the next time these students present this, they do something that feels to them that it has integrity and feels to the audience that it is worth their time for listening. I would like to think that I would like to think that if I were a judge for Panorama this year, which I'm not, um, if I were to write comments, they would all be comments that relate to how do you perform it better, and how do you make clearer to the audience as the arranger your intention, because I can't tell you anything about your music. I very rarely try to say to people that what I think about their music. A lot of what I typically write, has to do with the composer's intention, a musical intention. And that's always based on a conversation that happens, a tacit conversation between the arranger and the people in the yard. Because ultimately, if the people don't like it, it's not Panorama, you know? And I'm not going to, I've never seen myself as someone who says, you must do it this way. And if you don't do it this way, then you don't get the scores from me. um, Not for my students, and certainly not on the national stage, because that's just chauvinistic. Right? It's not my music; it's the people's music. So I have lots of thoughts, Mr. Ali. I have lots of thoughts on the panorama competition, on the bands, on the role of national bodies. But really and truly, well, I have a conversation for another day. First of all,
Yeah.
right? So I'll leave it there.
I want to comment from you. We have 3 more minutes.
Certainly.
One composer arranger many years ago said that people don't come to listen to Panorama, they come to see Panorama. How much
Mhm.
of theater is involved in music in terms of music and theater? It's a presentation. It's not just what something to hear, but when you go to a live show, you look at the musician. You don't close your eye and listen. So
Well,
the way it is presented is just as important. What is your take in terms of the theater that comes with a piece?
so you ask really fantastic questions. Let me just say, so as you know, I conduct the National Philharmonic Orchestra. The very first conversation I had with the players 10 years ago, 11 years ago, had to do with the fact that we need to find a way to present music that is Trinidadian. Yes, we're an orchestra and we have violins and woodwind instruments and brass instruments, etc. But that doesn't mean we need to play in a European setting or an American setting, or even an Asian setting. We need a setting that is recognizably Trinidadian. And what we look to is pan music. Because when you see pan men and women play their instruments, they are dancing, they are jumping, they're alive in the music. Their bodies are part of the music, and that is part of the panorama experience. Now, if you're playing a double bass, you can't really jump around. But um, there's a lot to be learned from our big brother genre, which is panorama music, about about what it is as a Trinidadian, what it means as a Trinidadian to express music on an instrument. So I don't argue with the person that made that comment. I think um, that it is a fine and true comment about the way we express and the way we consume culture in Trinidad and Tobago.
I want to thank you for your time and for taking the opportunity to share with us. Hopefully, we can invite you again, and once it's on your films, we can have another discussion. Thank you so much for your time and your efforts.
I'm very grateful for letting me talk. I don't get to talk about these things very often, right? So thank you so much. And enjoy the rest of your day and enjoy the panorama.